Now, pressure is mounting on the Justice and Correctional Services Department to give answers as to how Facebook rapist Thabo Bester escaped from jail. Now, the question is, did the department inform the victims Bester's monstrous crimes? And what legal grounds do they stand on? The convicted rapist was sentenced to life in prison at a maximum security jail in Mangaung in the Free State. In May last year, officials confirmed Bester had died in a prison cell. But it now turns out that he's a man on the run. Let's now bring in legal expert Advocate Paul Pretorius, evidence leader in the state capture inquiry. Advocate, thank you so much for your time here on ENCA. Just firstly, do his victims have grounds to sue, and who do they sue?
Well, if the escape is attributable to negligence on the part of Correctional Services or any deliberate act by an employer, which seems to be the case, and harm occurs in the future, and I stress harm occurs in the future as a result, there would be scope for an action against the state. But it's future harm, not the past harm. So as at present, in the absence of evidence of any harm, there is no scope for suing Correctional Services. But I might add to your earlier comment, in terms of the Correctional Services Act, once there is any death in a correctional centre or a prison, it must be reported forthwith to the inspecting judge. That is the judge who has the duty to inspect and report on conditions in prisons. And I'm not sure that that was done either. That's something worth looking at.
And when you talk about harm, future harm, for instance, if a victim, for instance, is just walking in a mall and she sees, Thabo Bester, and she goes through some traumatic feelings or a traumatic incident because of seeing him in the mall, would that also be grounds, or would he have to literally harm the person physically?
There is scope in our law for psychological harm. To found a lawsuit. So, in theory, yes, that might, in appropriate circumstances, ground an action against the state.
And if, for instance, he does harm, there's another incident, but it doesn't involve the victims that he was found guilty of either raping or killing, back those years ago when he was on trial. If he does perpetrate against another person, can those victims also come in, as part of the new case, for instance?
Yeah, short answer, yes.
All right.
Provided one can attribute fault or unlawfulness to Correctional Services, which on the face of it appears to be the case.
So for the moment, legally, who has the right to probably go against the state or sue Correctional Services, or is this just a legal matter of finding a prisoner on the run, a convicted prisoner on the run?
Well, of course, he must be found and every step must be taken to do so. The real issue is enforcement of the provisions of the Correctional Services Act, investigation by law enforcement authorities, and criminal prosecution. That's where this should go.
What do you think about G4S? I mean, without really, drawing any attention to the fact that it is a company that was also mentioned at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, which you were evidence leader of. There was Busasa and the G4S with private prisons, etc. There was a huge discussion and contention, particularly during the investigation of now whistleblower Angelo Agrizi. So do you think that G4S should also be a company that is more investigated, just in case there's any legal grounds to sue them?
Well, once this matter is properly investigated, and I stress properly investigated, it may give rise to the need for further investigation. You've raised the issue here of really outsourcing or privatizing the duties of Correctional Services in conducting prisons, or the new word correctional institutions. Or correctional centres. But I do know, but that's anecdotally, that there are many questions raised about the conduct of G4S internationally, in fact, and it's something that perhaps should be looked at more closely here. I know that the Minister does have the power by proclamation to declare any particular centre a correctional centre, which would include the power to outsource. And I presume that that was properly done with legal safeguards against the liability of G4S, but that's another matter that should be investigated. Under what conditions does G4S operate? What are its duties? Are these duties monitored, or is fulfillment of these duties monitored? This whole incident or series of incidents raises a number of very pertinent questions that should properly be investigated.
Well, Advocate, thank you so much for your time here on ENCA. I wonder if you can just answer this last question for me. In terms of what you said, the examples that you and I have given throughout the course of our conversation, in terms of victims having not been informed and whether they go through psychological trauma, and as you said, if Bester actually commits something in future, they could sue the state. Are they better off suing the state or an individual? Because, you know, there's also word about the deputy commissioner or the deputy, a deputy either in the department or in the correctional services, a commissioner in the correctional services who ignored officials, letting them know that that body did not belong to Thabo Bester. Would a victim be better off suing an individual, or is it better suing the state?
A victim could do both. The individual acting in the course and scope of his or her duty would make the state liable for any harm that that individual has occasioned.
Well, thank you very much, Advocate Paul Pretorius. He's a legal expert, and you might remember him. He was an evidence leader at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry.